So I'm not going to make you come up to the board and write any programming. So it's nothing to be scared of there. Today is specifically about JavaScript. JavaScript, just a brief overview, is a client-side scripting language. It happens on the browser. It doesn't happen on the server. There is server-side JavaScript, but most people don't use it. It's used to make single web pages look interactive, make things move around, appear, disappear. And it's an extra layer on top of HTML, which is the code for the web page, and on top of CSS, which is what makes the web page look pretty. So accessible JavaScript, this is a quote from Tim Berners-Lee, who you probably know is the W3C director and the inventor of the World Wide Web. He said, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." So that just speaks to the idea of making the web accessible to everyone. So today we're going to talk about what is JavaScript accessibility, why should I care about JavaScript accessibility, what happens if I don't use accessible JavaScript, and how can I make my JavaScript accessible. Accessible JavaScript is device independent. That means that whether you're using a mouse or a keyboard or a screen reader, you can still get at the information. It doesn't block depending on what type of device you're using. And that speaks to the second point too, that information isn't blocked by the JavaScript. So even if you can't run the JavaScript, you can still see the pop-up that appears, or the little bit of information that appears when you roll over something. And JavaScript that's accessible doesn't break the expectations of how the web works. So if you click on a link, it's going to take you somewhere. It's not JavaScript that's going to block that link. And, there's some references to the W3C's accessibility guidelines and the W3C's mobile web best practices. These are two guidelines that will help not only in accessible JavaScript, but making the whole web page accessible. So why should I care about JavaScript accessibility? One of the main reasons is SEO, search engine optimization. The Google Spider does not support JavaScript, so if you have a web page that you want to appear at the top of a specific search for Google, maybe a law clinic or something like that, and it has JavaScript that's preventing some information from displaying, then Google's not going to catch that, and it's not going to go through their secret algorithm of how they decide where to put the page on the ranking. Another reason is that mobile browsers have limited JavaScript, and these are things like phones. There's a web page at quirksmode.org that has a pretty good list. You can see all the things in red are JavaScript functions that are not supported on specific phones. They list things like the Nokia, the BlackBerry, I believe the iPhone is up there. So you can see all the red for different events. These are things that, depending on what mobile browser you're using, you're not going to be able to do in JavaScript. Another reason to care about JavaScript accessibility is that assistive technologies limit JavaScript. Things like screen readers, users who are browsing via a keyboard, or users who browse with a footpad. These technologies usually support a very limited set of JavaScript, or they might not support JavaScript at all. And then the last thing is the Section 508, which is the federal code that requires accessible web pages for US government sites. But also there are several states and universities that have adopted this as their guideline. So you might want to check with your school to see if that applies to you. Section 508, as it relates to JavaScript, talks about making sure that the information is available when you have JavaScript disabled. That's item L there. Then in item N, it talks about forms that are accessible. So the JavaScript you shouldn't have JavaScript required to be able to complete the form. And then in section P, it talks about if you have a timed response, then you should give the user sufficient time to complete that page and notify them, or give them a way to notify that they need more time. I don't really know where that would come into play unless you're doing something like a online exam where there's a certain time limit for how long a user can answer a question. So this comes from the w3schools.com, who's browsing without JavaScript. It goes from 2000 to 2008. You can see that the percentage has gone from 20% down to 5% in 2008. The current estimates are between 1% and 3% are browsing without JavaScript. This site may be a little biased because they're measuring who's coming to their site without JavaScript enabled, and the people who tend to visit w3sites.com are developers who are a little more paranoid than everybody else, so they tend to come without JavaScript enabled. So if you have a laptop, we're going to do a little experiment and see what happens if you have JavaScript disabled. So I put up some directions for how to disable JavaScript in your browser, depending on if you're running IE, Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. If you're running Opera or Conqueror or something like that, or Lynx, then you're on your own for disabling it. So there are 3 sites we're going to look at. The first is benjerry.com. If you load that without JavaScript, I'm going to disable my JavaScript here. Then you get this, which is degrades fairly well. It still presents all the information, has a lot of extra information that isn't on the site that they're hiding with JavaScript. For example, this Halloween link. Obviously, it's summer. There's no reason to have a Halloween link. But if you click on it, then you see where the problem comes up. They're relying on JavaScript to trigger Flash, and without JavaScript, you really don't get any content. So the next one is reader.google.com. That one, it looks pretty good when you load it if you're not logged into Google already. As soon as you log into Google, that's the content you get. Everything is, they're relying on JavaScript for everything on this page except for the logo. And then the last one is apple.com/safari/download. That one looks really good. It looks like everything works until, and I just discovered this when I was installing Safari for this presentation. Click on the download now, and nothing downloads. It actually disappears. So that's without JavaScript.
And it doesn't very gracefully not do it.
It's very, very gracefully degrades to not download the browser. So how can you make your JavaScript accessible? I'm going to talk about 6 different areas, going from the easiest changes down to the hardest, starting with the different events and JavaScript, moving on to the HTML and then Ajax, and finally some tabs and other widgets. First, events. JavaScript is an event-based language, so the way it works is you do something in the browser, like click on something. It triggers an event, goes and finds an event handler in JavaScript, executes that piece of code, and returns to the web page. So click events, on-click, on-double-click, are triggered when you use the mouse to click on something. So obviously, users without keyboards are not going to be able to access those events. And also, this is used a lot to break the web page expectations, because very frequently people put the JavaScript void 0 in the href target of the link. So if you click on a link without JavaScript, then nothing happens. So here's a little demo. I'll turn JavaScript back on just to show you what this inaccessible one here. You click on it and it shows you the error message. Now without JavaScript, click on it and nothing happens. The accessible one still brings up the error message and hides it. Here I've also, on the if I enable JavaScript, I've done the double-click event to make the error message go away. I've never actually seen the double-click event used, but it's there if you ever want to do it. So the code for that, if you look at line 11, is where this is the inaccessible one that doesn't work without JavaScript. There on line 11, you see the JavaScript void 0. That's if someone clicks on the link, the href is supposed to point them to where they're supposed to be taken to next. So where they're going to next is into the void. It has an on-click event that returns the, displays the error, and on double-click event that hides the error. And then this is the accessible one. It's pretty easy to change, make accessible, like I said. All you need to do is replace that href with an actual target. So here that target is just a Cold Fusion page that hides and shows the error message. Oh, and another thing here is, even with JavaScript enabled, you get that standard JavaScript action. But then, so the on-click is still there, and then at the end of the on-click event, it returns false, so it doesn't actually do the click if you have JavaScript. It just sends to the event and then stops processing. The next set of events are the mouse over events, on mouse over and on mouse out. These are used to do things like create drop-down menus, pop-up windows. Anytime you roll your mouse cursor over something on the web and something changes, that's an on-mouse event. These are problems in touch devices and keyboard users, because keyboard users obviously aren't doing mouse events. Touch devices handle mouse events very differently. I think it's the iPhone that if you scroll over something, it immediately triggers the on mouse over and on mouse out. So you never actually see what's happening because it's like instant. It does both. So obviously the data that you're trying to show isn't available if you have this. Ways to fix it are to provide, again, links with your targets with your links, hidden links for your pop-ups, and CSS to create hover effects. So here, what I'm using here to turn the JavaScript on and off, by the way, is the web developer toolbar. It's really, it's for Firefox. It gives you a lot of things that you can, shortcuts to make changes in the browser. So here I have JavaScript enabled. You see I roll over this, it brings up the submenu. I move the mouse out, it goes away. Same here because I have the JavaScript on both of them. Now here without the JavaScript, you don't get the submenu on the first one. On the second one, it's relying on a click, so you still get that information. Here's the code again. On line 12, you'll see that it's not actually a link in the first example. It's using a div. So there's nothing that's adhering to the HTML standards, because you're expected to click or roll over this and trigger something, but it's not actually a link. So the second example, this is the accessible one. And then you see on line 12, on line 12, I've added the A with the href that actually goes somewhere. That's inside the div, so you can still have the same style that you had before. The style was a little different on my page, but you can change that of the A link. The last set of events are the form events on change and on submit. These are used to customize forms on the fly, do things like cascading select boxes where you might say select a term, and then once they've chosen the term, you populate another box of classes that are available. It's also for optional form questions. If you do something like, if you answer yes, you're going to get 5 additional questions on this form. And ways to fix those are to submit the partial form to simulate dynamic form actions, duplicate validation on the server, which I'm sure we all do, and then ensure that the form always submits. So here we have a form. I'm going to go ahead and enter some data. I have this little checkbox that says my billing address is the same. When I click that, it automatically fills in my billing address. If I change that billing address now, it no longer matches, it's going to give me a JavaScript validation error. If I disable JavaScript, then on the second one, I've replaced the checkbox with a button. And this button is actually a submit button that's going to submit this top part of the form. And then it's going to come back and refresh this top part of the form and add the data down here. So it's submitting part of the form, and it simulates that dynamic action that you had with the checkbox on the first half. So there again, you see the in line 21, there's the onSubmit action that when you submit the form, it triggers that process form function, which does the validation. Like I said, you want to repeat that validation on the server. And then on line 26 is where the onChange event is triggered, right here. And so when that checkbox is changed, goes from checked to unchecked, it's going to trigger that auto enter address, which is either going to clear the address box or duplicate the value from the shipping address. So here, in the fixed version, line 24 is now a submit button. Over here, you'll see that we were using the checkbox. And the submit button still uses the onClick event, but if you have JavaScript disabled, it will submit the form. And then it does the form processing as well. It also has the onSubmit event. Dynamic HTML is another area of a lot of JavaScript use. This is using JavaScript to manipulate elements of the document object model to make things move around on the page. A lot of what I've shown you is DHTML. If you have JavaScript disabled, you're not going to see a lot of these events. Ways to fix it. There's a lot of CSS you can do to simulate DHTML. You can use CSS for rollover effects. You can use CSS to hide some data and then add a link or a button to get it back. So here you'll see the first one. I have a little rollover that's changing that color to red. And then there's a click event here that's showing that example text. Here there's a rollover event, and again a rollover event here to change the color. And again, without JavaScript, this doesn't work. This one still works. The rollover works because I hadn't fixed this. They're using the same class in the CSS, so I just put the in the code there's a rollover event on the CSS, so that's why those two have the same effect. So here, this is the inaccessible one. You see in line 15, there's that. This time it's actually using a JavaScript inside the href. So like I said before, you want to have an actual address there for a page. You can put JavaScript void there, or you could put JavaScript and some function. Either one of those is going to break the expectations of the web page for someone who doesn't have the click event, or someone who doesn't have JavaScript enabled. So here's the fixed version. Again, it's using an actual page for that A link on line 17. It has the mouse over events. And then here is the color change. It has an ID on that div, and then in the style sheet on the very first line, you can see that I've used CSS to create that rollover effect. And the fifth area is AJAX interactions. AJAX is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's a fairly new thing. It's what makes all the web pages seem like they're really fast and responsive, like desktop applications. It's used to submit a small portion of the page and then refresh it without actually loading the entire page again. And so screen readers aren't going to be able to handle these. Screen readers don't have they usually have a very limited set of JavaScript. So they don't have the JavaScript events that are going to be able to handle AJAX interactions. And like I said, web spiders like the Googlebot don't support JavaScript at all. So if you're using AJAX to get at the data, using AJAX exclusively, then the spiders are going to be left out. So to fix it, you want to have your AJAX code callable, being called from both your JavaScript and your HTML forms and links. So when you have a form or a link, you submit it back to the server. That, in turn, you can pass along a variable saying, I'm coming from a form, I'm not coming from AJAX. And then that will, on the back end, go and get the data. If it's coming from JavaScript, you can send a variable along saying, I'm coming from JavaScript, send this back as a JSON set of data. JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's usually what's passed back in AJAX submissions. So again, here's a example. I click on this button, it uses JavaScript to load the data and pop up a little message that the data was loaded. Here it's going to use JavaScript again. If I disable, I got to take out this parameter. Then you'll see that if I click on this, it loads the data, but also I've added a link where you can load the data, and that's going to add the variable to the URL. And that variable is sent back to the server, and the server sees that and says, okay, I'm going to call the AJAX function on the back end and get the data and send it back as part of the page in the page refresh. So again, the inaccessible one, uses this is using jQuery, which is a library for JavaScript. It's any JavaScript library now is going to have AJAX functions in it. jQuery is very good for JavaScript that degrades well. They seem to put a lot of focus on that in their work. So what this is doing is just attaching an event to when the page is loaded. That's in line 2. Line 3 is attaching an event to the click of that button. So when the click happens, it's going to trigger that get function, which is executing a get request to the server. It gets that JS5 ajax.cfm, returns it, passes in a parameter to say I'm coming from Ajax, sends it back as JSON, and then it just populates that result div down in line 17 with the data that comes back from the server. So here's the accessible one. It has the same bit of JavaScript, so if you have JavaScript enabled, you're going to get the faster interaction. It's not going to have to reload the entire page. But if you don't have JavaScript enabled, or you don't have some of these events, then it's going to actually submit the form in line 18, and that form's going to go back to the server with the my button to variable. The server is going to look for that variable and say, this is coming from someone who doesn't have Ajax, so I'm going to add that data into the page. And again, the link does the same thing, just adds it to the URL. So you're going to get the same effect. Tabs and widgets are things that rely on DHTML and or Ajax and all the events we talked about. This is like the culmination of everything. Anyone with limited or missing JavaScript is going to have trouble with these. The data is not going to be available. The page may not load. So I'm going to show you something we put together at the Penn Law School for students to track their professionalism. Let me select a user first. You see here on this page, we have that message. You must have JavaScript enabled to use this page. You want to try and avoid that. This is some pretty old code that we have running here. We haven't gone back and updated this page. This is our in-house course management system. So here I've logged in as a test user. Without JavaScript enabled, you see it brings up the unordered list of sites. I can go into any of them. It gives me this little button to get back. With JavaScript enabled, those unordered links turn into tabs. And so that's a really good way to degrade your page. So this is using a jQuery library that turns unordered lists into tabs. And there are a lot of things out there like that. If you're trying to use widgets, especially for jQuery, there's a lot of libraries that will take standard HTML, transform it into something a little more interactive. And the button to get back to the main page is gone because now we have all these tabs. So like I was talking about, that button is displayed by default, and then there's JavaScript that runs to hide the button. So if someone's running without JavaScript, they're not going to see that button. You want to try and avoid the no script tag, because there are things like the screen readers that have very limited JavaScript, so they're not going to see the no script tag, and they might not be able to run that event. So they might be left out, even though you tried to make the page degrade. So a way around that is to put everything into the page and then take it out with JavaScript. That way, make sure that you're hitting everybody. So some tools for JavaScript development. NoScript is a plugin for Firefox that you can enable or disable JavaScript per site. Firebug is a plugin that's really good if you're doing Ajax development because you can see what the HTTP requests and responses are. Web Developer Toolbar, which is what I was using to turn the JavaScript on and off. And then Chrome and IE have some built-in developer tools. I haven't found them to be as robust as the Web Developer Toolbar or Firebug. And then, like I said, jQuery. I don't want to be a jQuery evangelist, but it seems to work really well for. There are other JavaScript libraries out there like Ext, which tends to focus on widgets to the exclusion of making them degrade well. So what do I need to remember from this? Like I said, build the initial site without JavaScript and then add it at the end. So that way you have a fully functioning site and the JavaScript just enhances what you're doing. Avoid using the JavaScript void zero because that's going to take your users into nothing if they don't have that click event. Keep any code that might be called asynchronously separate. That way, at the end of development, when you're developing your JavaScript, you have something that's already a separate piece of code that you can call from your server-side code if they don't have JavaScript enabled, or you can call it from JavaScript if you're doing an Ajax thing. Limit your use of NoScript just to make everything as accessible as possible. Always do your validation on the client and the server, and test without JavaScript. I haven't really found a testing suite that's good for verifying accessibility in JavaScript. There's some good testing sites out there that will verify your HTML is accessible, but they tend to have a hard time with JavaScript. So it tends to be a manual task. And that's it. Any questions?
Well, yeah, how, is there an easy link for us to find those samples that you, like those samples you
Yeah, all those samples are available on, all those samples are available on our Law Pen website. So those will,
slides are, is this slides set, other than the video? Is this slide set available?
I'm not sure how that's going to work afterwards. You can
scribble
jot these down. They're all
scribble this down.
they're all sequential, so it just goes from JS1 through JS5.cfn.
No access restrictions on HTTPS?
No. Any other questions? Yeah.
Any opinion on any of the other libraries aside from jQuery, like, say, for instance, Prototype or Scriptaculous? I mean, do they not degrade as well in your opinion?
I haven't really used those libraries.
That's fine. I'm a back-end guy in terms of development, and I'm also a sysadmin, and I'm just always trying to keep our user interface folks, because I came from a federal environment where this sort of thing was important.
Right.
And then you look at some of the stuff we've got hanging out there, and it's just, you know, it's not going to cut it. So
yeah.
We're redeveloping now, and so we're looking at some Ajax functionality, but this is a sort of gotcha that gives me a pause. I mean, you really got to be careful with bells and whistles.
Right.
So, okay.
We're a Cold Fusion shop mainly. We're transitioning over to ASP.NET. But Ext comes with Cold Fusion built in, so the Ext library. So that when I started using that, it came with Cold Fusion 8, which came out a couple years ago. When I started using all these new features that they added, I noticed that none of them would degrade well. So that's when I went looking for something that would, and found jQuery. So I didn't really look into Prototype or Scriptaculous. Any other questions? All right. That's the end, and thank you very much. And I'm going to let you go and get some food before the last talk of the day. Thank you.
Gotta make sure the machine is charged for that long way over.
Just want to have to keep this thing plugged in.
Yep. You know exactly.
Hibernating instead of sleeping and not touching my telephone. Got 2 batteries. This thing takes, it doesn't take long to hibernate. Go to sleep. It takes batteries.
So you still in a master's program over there?
Yes.
I was looking at that while you were talking. So
Yeah.
basically, I'm looking to do the same thing as, actually, I've been working in IT for every day, but the degree is not in IT, so is that basically a very compensating? It's just doing it the graduate route.
Right. Yeah, my degree is in English.
Yeah. And so, I think I'm going to do the same thing as they have a master's in IT where I'm working. And
What school is that?
University of Cincinnati.
Okay.
And, actually, it's information systems, but you can do an emphasis in IT, which is more applied, of course. But,
Yeah, I like that part. We have a computer science master's and then IT master's. And
yeah.
IT seems more applied.
Well, for what we do. I mean, like you and I mean, basically, it's hands-on with keyboard, not inventing new algorithms.
Right.
And so, well, I mean, I started out in computer science and that years ago, and it just really wasn't germane. I mean, that was it.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks again for the presentation.
Sure.
I think this is an issue that, and, you know, I keep harping on it. We're working at a Drupal site, and it just stays in the back of my mind. I mean, I think Target or someone was sued half to death over, you know, basically accessibility standards.
Right.
And as a university, it's just, the onus is on us to, you know, toe the line. So,
Yeah.
thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.